Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Cooking with Shane. We are coming to an end here of our summer reading program. We've got 2 weeks left, which means I have 2 recipes left for you. So we visited all kinds of fairy tales. We visited Hansel and Gretel. We visited Alice in Wonderland, and we visited a lot of them. And today we're going to visit Snow White. Now, Snow White is infamous for eating the apple that put her into a deep sleep. So we are going to use apples today to make a very tasty apple fritter. So if you don't know what an apple fritter is, it's kind of like a cakey donut that's got apples inside. You make it very similarly. So we'll talk a little bit real quick about the apple that you should use for this. As long as you're using a little bit more of a sour apple, you don't want a sweet apple for this, because the batter, the cake batter, the donut batter is pretty sweet. And you don't want like a Red Delicious, because it won't hold up. The texture is just not strong enough to hold up. So for this, I prefer a Granny Smith apple. It's a nice tart flavor and it contrasts nicely with the donut and then the sugary glaze that we're going to put on top of it. So if you can, use a Granny Smith apple. And I have already, just so you don't have to sit here and watch me cut these all up, I've cut up about 2 apples. You want about 2 cups, 2.5 cups for this, in pretty bite-sized pieces. I've taken the peel off them and I've taken the core out and I've just diced them up. And I add a little bit of lemon juice on top of that just to keep them from browning. So if you've ever eaten or taken a big bite of an apple and set it down, or a banana and then set it down, and then you go back to it a couple minutes later and it's all brown, that's just because it's gone through a process called oxidation. And it's just the oxygen kind of pulling out the sugars, and kind of, it looks gross. It still will taste the same, but we don't really want these brown. We want these nice and firm, and we want them to look pretty. So I've just added a little bit of lemon juice on the top of that to keep them from turning that brown color. So if you've been to any of my cooking programs, or if you've watched any of the last few weeks, when we're baking and we're making things like this, we usually do it in batches. We usually do a dry, we mix our dry ingredients and then we mix our wet ingredients and then we combine them. And the reason we do that is just to make sure that everything gets incorporated nice and mixed in well. Because if we try to mix all of the dry in with all of the wet before the dry is all mixed together, you're going to get clumps and stuff. So we're going to mix all of our dry in one, then we'll mix our wet in another, and then we'll combine them. So it's actually a really simple recipe. It just starts off with a cup of regular all-purpose flour. And then we're going to do 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So this is what's going to give us the nice lift. So when you see this batter, it's going to look thin, it's going to look like it's not going to work, but all of this baking powder is what's going to give it its nice lift and make them rise up nice. Alright, so we have 2 teaspoons of that. I need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. You can add more if you happen to pour a little too much into your teaspoon. It's alright. It's just going to give you a little more cinnamon flavor. You don't want too much, because cinnamon in large amounts is actually really hot. If you've ever had a fireball or one of those hot tamales, that's just a concentrated dose of cinnamon, which is really hot when you have a lot of it. So you wouldn't want to go more than a teaspoon or 2. But if you really like the cinnamon flavor, you can increase it to maybe 1 teaspoon. Okay, so we're just going to sift this. And again, if you've ever watched, I like to sift all of my dry ingredients, especially when it's humid like it has been the last couple weeks. A lot of the ingredients in here, the baking powder especially, and the flour, tend to like to clump up. So we want to send it through the sifter so we can get it all nice and small. So this will just help make sure that it gets mixed in when we mix it in with the wet ingredients. So we don't get like a large clump of baking powder or a large clump of flour into our wet ingredients, because it won't work its way out. It won't shake out and wiggle. If you have a lump in your wet ingredients, you're going to have a big lump in your fritter. And there are a few things worse in your dining experience than biting into something sweet and getting a huge mouthful of baking powder, because it's really salty and really acidic. Alright, so that's our dry ingredients. Those are all done. That's simple. Then we're going to go to our wet ingredients. So we've got 2 eggs. You want these to be room temperature. You want everything to sort of be room temperature when you're doing things like this. It just helps it mix in better. You don't want it cold because that'll sort of like harden things up. So if you can have it at room temperature, that's perfect. Take it out maybe half an hour before you're going to do this. And I probably should tell you too, I've got a fryer going with oil, and I've got this set up to 375. You want this ready to go once you've made your batter. So if you don't have an electric fryer, you can just use a frying pan. You just have to be a little more careful about how you're monitoring the temperature, because if you're just doing it on a stovetop, it's just going to heat up and heat up and heat up, and eventually it's going to smoke, and at some point it could catch on fire, which we don't want, right? So if you can, an electric fryer is really awesome. You can get a pretty decent one for like $20. And you know, I've got it set to 375, so once it gets to 375, it's going to stop heating at that point and just hold it at 375. Another thing too, we'll talk a little bit later on when we're actually doing the frying, is why it's important to keep that at 375. So back to our batter and our wet ingredients. We've got 2 eggs here, and I need 2 tablespoons of sugar. So we're just going to mix this a couple minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, just until it's nice and combined. It's going to sort of be a nice yellow lemony color. So this is just going to take 1 to 2 minutes. Good. Just a little bit lighter yellow than when the yolks were in there. I have no idea. I think I just made that word up. But when the yolks were in there. So that's all set to go. That's set. Now we are going to mix our dry ingredients in. So we're going to do this in 2 stages. So again, we're just doing it in 2 stages so we're not getting a mess everywhere. So we're going to put half of this in. And just mix it until it's incorporated, till you don't see any like flour left. Broke my own rule. Start on 1. Dry ingredients. Start back on 1, hopefully. There we go. Alright, so this is going to be really thick for right now, but we're going to add milk and thin it right out. Alright, so to this we are going to add 1/4 cup of whole milk. And just mix it in. Alright, and we're just going to mix this until it sort of looks like cake batter, typical cake batter. It's nice and smooth. You'll see there's no lumps in it, it looks nice. So that's all set. Now we're just going to take our apples and fold them in. Now it looks like a lot of apples for this. So we talk a little bit about how this is going to look like a funky batter, and you have no idea how it's going to work, but it will. The apples will actually release a little bit of water as they fry. That'll help keep the dough nice and moist. So right now it looks really thin. You have no idea how this is all going to hold together, but you'll see. Okay. All right, so at this point I always like to sort of go through my recipe and make sure that I've added everything. Because once we start baking it, we really can't add anything. But at this point, you know, it happens all the time. You either skip a line or you just get distracted and you just miss an ingredient. So you always just want to go back and make sure you have the flour, the baking powder, salt, sugar, eggs, milk, and oil. So we are good. I'm just going to move this out of the way. So if you're ever working with oil, always want to make sure that you've got a parent around, because oil gets really hot. So like we said, this is 375 degrees. So it's really, really hot, and if you get it on you, it burns, and it kind of like will continue to burn. So you just want to be very careful when you're working with oil. Make sure that it's always on a nice, flat, even surface. You don't want it rocking. You don't want it tilted one way or the other. You want a nice, flat, even surface. So we've got our fritter batter ready. And now we just fry them. So I've got a little ice cream scoop. So I'm just going to take a scoop and I'm going to put it in my oil. And I'm going to let it cook about 2 or 3 minutes per side. I don't know if you've ever heard the term of GBD, which is golden brown delicious. That's normally what you want when you're frying, but with a fritter you actually want it a little darker than golden brown delicious. That's just the way they're cooked. They're a little bit darker. You don't want it burnt, and you'll know when you look at it if it's burnt. But we're going to dunk this whole thing in a confectioner sugar glaze, so it can be a little bit darker because the outside isn't going to be as crispy as it would be if you didn't have the icing. So it can be a little darker, and it'll be nice, and it'll still be nice and moist on the inside. So you just take your scoop and into the oil. So you always want to kind of make sure whatever you're holding is sort of between you and the oil, so it doesn't splash up and hit your fingers. And we referenced earlier about why it's important to kind of have this electric fryer, because it will keep this oil at 375. So when we put all of this batter in, if you've just got like oil in a pan on your stove, the temperature is going to decrease dramatically because we're putting in all of this sort of room temperature ingredients. So it's just going to take your oil temperature down, and then it's going to come back up to 375. Where with this, it stays at 375, so it starts frying immediately, and you won't get like a really greasy product at the end. If you have it on the stove, it's fine. It'll be fine. It'll just be a little bit more greasy. So we're going to let this cook a couple minutes on each side, and then we're going to take it, and we've got a pan here that's just got like a little baking sheet, a cookie sheet here, with a little cookie rack on here, and then paper towels. So when this comes off, we'll put it directly on here, and then let all of that oil sort of dry off, and then we're going to dunk it into our glaze. So we're just going to take a peek. These are looking pretty good. We're going to turn them. Sometimes they get away from you. Yeah, so if you don't have an electric grill and you're just doing this on the stove, you just want to limit how many you put in. You probably only want to do 2 or 3 at a time. If you only do 2 or 3 at a time, that'll help keep your oil at about the right temperature. But if you start putting in 4, 5, 6, 7, then it starts getting to the point where it's starting to decrease the temperature of your oil. So we're going to let these fry, and while these fry and dry a little bit, we're going to make a really quick glaze to put on these. So. Okay, so for the glaze, it's a really, really simple glaze. It's just confectioner sugar. I have 1 1/4 cup of confectioner sugar in here, and I have about a teaspoon of vanilla. So to this, I'm going to add just a little bit of milk. Now, if you go to the website and get a recipe for this, you'll notice that it says 3 to 6 teaspoons of milk. You want to start on the low end because you just don't know how much milk that this sugar is going to sort of soak up. So it's best to start low and work your way high, because if you put too much in, then you got to add more confectioner sugar, and then it's too thick, and you spend the whole day just trying to make the right consistency. So we're going to start with 3 and see what that looks like. And you're kind of looking for the Goldilocks if we want to bring in another sort of fairy tale. You want the Goldilocks of sort of spreadability and pourability. You don't want this to be too thick because it won't pour over the fritter the way it's supposed to. You don't want it too thin because it'll all just sort of pour off. So this is 3 right now. That's way too thick. So we're going to add 1 teaspoon at a time until we get this consistency we're looking for. And we're just going to check our fritters real quick. Oh yeah. So you might look at that and think that's a little bit darker. I don't know if you can see it really from here. That's a little bit darker than what you're looking for, but you want it a little bit darker because you want it to be a little harder so it will sort of soak in this glaze. So that's actually a good color. So I'm looking at this. You know, this is sort of what you normally want for a glaze, but this is still a little thick. So I'm going to add 1 more teaspoon. And when it all sort of comes off really quick, that's perfect. Okay, so we're going to pull these out. And we're going to just put them right on our paper towels. So don't be afraid, you know, if you really aren't really sure if they're done, 2 to 3 minutes on each side, it should be just about enough. But if you're not sure, just take a knife and cut one open. It's really hot, so don't like really grab onto it. And just kind of take a peek in. And it should look, it's nice and moist on the inside, your apples are cooked nice. That's about the consistency you're looking for, and oops, now we have to eat one. So, it's a win-win situation. You know that these are cooked for the people that you're going to be serving them for, and you know, you get to eat one while they're waiting. So we're going to let these cool for like 2 minutes, because they're really too hot to put a glaze on right now. If you put the glaze on right now, it's just all going to come off. But if you wait until it gets too cold, it'll stay on too thick, and it'll be more like the glaze on top of a donut. You know, if you had like a Boston cream donut, it would kind of sit on the top. And we don't really want it to sit on top. We want it to just sort of soak into the fritter. So we're going to let this cool for about 2 minutes, and then we're going to give it a dunk. So we'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, so now our fritters, we can handle them. We're not going to get burnt. So we've got our glaze here, and this is just the fun part, because this is where you kind of get to get sticky and dirty. So you just kind of put it in, and just let the excess kind of slide off, and then we're going to dunk it, and we're going to do the other side, get all the sides, and then just let the excess kind of fall off. So as this sits, that will sort of soak into that crust. It looks a little heavy now, but it'll actually kind of soak in. And we're just going to do this with the rest of them. Super simple. This is sort of the fun part for you guys because you get the sugar all over your fingers, and when you're done, don't lick your fingers in between dunks. But after you're done, you get to lick your fingers off. Alright, so we'll just do one more here. And if you find you're getting a little low on your icing, you can just go ahead and make another little batch. Alright, so there's the apple fritter. I hope you guys try it. It's a great breakfast. This would be like a great weekend breakfast. And don't forget, when your fingers are covered in the nice glaze, you get to lick your fingers. I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to do it off camera because it probably will be pretty. But I hope you try this. I hope you enjoy it, and we will see you next week.